Welcome back to this edition of Walking in Spirit and Truth. And this is John Craig.
And this is Sandy.
And we've got quite the show planned for you today. And pretty excited to have a little bit of a discussion around a topic that is familiar. But boy, when we start digging into it, there is a lot to it.
There's a lot to it. Oh, hopefully there's some meat in there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so what we're going to talk about tonight is Isaiah 6, and it is always been one of my favorite passages. And it has so many word pictures in there, so much drama in it. And so we're going to read it. All right?
Yeah, we're ready to go. And I was just thinking, I'm with you, Sandy. This has been one of those amazing passages that I have used many times in messages or referred to because it's so rich and there's so much in it, but it also gives such perspective. So this is from Isaiah chapter 6, beginning with verse 1. In the year King Uzziah's death, I saw Yahweh sitting on a throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. Seraphim stood above him, each having 6 wings. With 2 he covered his face, and with 2 he covered his feet, and with 2 he flew. And one called out to another and said, Holy, holy, holy is Yahweh of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations of the thresholds trembled at the voice of him who called out, while the temple was filling with smoke. Then I said, Woe is me, for I am ruined, because I am a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, for my eyes have seen the King, Yahweh of hosts.
All right. Now, there's a lot in here. We're going to take some things apart, and we may not go in the order that it's listed, but we're going to start tonight with looking at the very first verse. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw Yahweh seated on the throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. All right. Now, we say train of his robe. We sing train of his robe filled the temple all the time in our congregation. But do we really understand what that means? I want you to picture, probably of most recent times, it would be Queen Elizabeth. June 3rd of 1953, millions of people tuned in and watched Queen Elizabeth II on TV and live, gathered around. And there was so much fanfare and majesty. But what did she do? She slowly and elegantly walked with this massive train. I was hoping to get a picture of it, but we don't have that right now. But she proceeded down this aisle of Westminster Abbey. And behind her trailed a robe of royal purple velvet, 18 feet long. There were 6 maids of honor supporting the weight of that train. But even Queen Elizabeth's grand stately robe, does it compare to Yah's? No. I can't imagine the weight of that train just trying to walk without the assistance of the people that she had with her. It would be very difficult. But there's something about the length of a train when it comes to royalty, when it comes to kings and queens. It's going to give us a message. So we may say, why did she have to have one that was 18 feet long? Well, tradition will show us as we study this out that it was really, really important for her to have the length of that train. So we're going to jump in and we're going to give a little bit of background before we get going too much and talk about King Uzziah. Now, it says in the year King Uzziah died. That can have many meanings and implications there. Everybody is not on the same page of what that means. It can be a marker of time for the transition in his life that was about to transpire. I personally don't believe that one's it. It could be a statement of reverence, sadness, and remorse, or the loss of a king and a friend. I don't believe that's it either. But it could have been a time of question and doubt, even confusion. And I guess I lean a little bit more towards, it says he died. So maybe as we study, we can get more revelation on that. But it could be a time when everybody says what's happening right now because there's been this transition. I've noticed as a pastor over the years, any change causes people to be flustered. In fact, any change in a congregation, a location, a shift of something else, literally people jump ship. Now, I'm not saying in a kingdom people jump ship, but it causes something among people when there's a shift, and especially a shift in leadership, sometimes to act in a way that they might normally not act, and have emotion, and things just stirred up within them. Now, maybe even Isaiah is discouraged, maybe not. I don't know the emotions of Isaiah, but when we look at in the year King Uzziah died, what kind of reign did he have? I think we have to understand that first. What kind of reign did King Uzziah have? Well, let's look at 2 Chronicles, and momentarily. No, let's start with 2 Kings 15. We're going to look 1 through 7. 2 Kings 15, 1 through 7. But keep everything ready, in Isaiah as well, so don't lose your place there.
Okay, so 2 Kings
now,
15.
Now before you know this, Uzziah is called as Azariah in this. It's the same guy. Uzziah and Azariah are the same guy.
So in the 27th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, Azariah, son of Amaziah, king of Judah, became king. He was 16 years old when he became king, and he reigned 52 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Yecholiah of Jerusalem. And he did right in the sight of Yahweh according to all that his father Amaziah had done. Only the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burned incense on the high places. And Yahweh struck the king so that he was a leper to the day of his death. And he lived in a separate house while Jotham, the king's son, was over the household, judging the people of the land. Now the rest of the acts of Azariah and all that he did, are they not written in the book of Chronicles of the kings of Judah? And Azariah slept with his fathers, and they buried him with his fathers in the city of David, and Jotham, his son, became king in his place.
All right. So we know that this was in the 52nd year of his reign. Now, where does that put us in a timeline? Well, it's in the year of 3246 from the creation of the world. And according to Jerome, it was the year in which Romulus, the founder of the Roman Empire, was born. So that's going to give us a little bit of perspective of a timeline here. So Romulus was supposed to have been born this same year that King Uzziah died. Some understand this, that it's not a proper death. It's really speaking of when he was stricken with leprosy, when he burnt incense in the temple, upon which he was shut up in a separate house. I don't believe that. And I don't believe it was this kind of death. I believe it was death, but he was smitten at this time. So why was he smitten? Let's go over a little bit of that right now, because when you just read it briefly at the beginning of Isaiah in chapter 6, you may not necessarily get the full meaning of why he was struck with leprosy. So let's look at it. And in the first sense, let's go to what some other sages have said. Ibn Ezra said that this would have to be the beginning of the prophecy of Isaiah because of the mission of the prophet to fill it. Now, so what is that saying? That's going back to when this prophecy is written. There's debate among the sages. So can you believe that? And what does it said? You have 2 Jews and 3 opinions?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there are things out there that disagree with some specifics of this piece of history, but that's okay because we are discussing that right now. And then when it comes to this timeline, others actually say that the mission is not the prophecy in general, but particularly the reproof that the prophet was sent to give the Hebrews here that were mentioned. So whatever it is, we know that Isaiah is the son of Amos, and he saw 3 years, or as others say, 30 years after prophecy was taken from him. He had prophesied about 10 years before this in the reign of Uzziah. And then for Isaiah, the only vision that he had with Uzziah's son was only one. We only had one vision with Jotham. The next prophecy was delivered to King Ahaz. So, and you can read that in Isaiah 7:1. So pretty close to what we're right by us. And then also he gave some things to King Hezekiah. But let's pinpoint this a little bit more. We've already talked about when this date is from creation, but it was about 700 years before Yeshua was born. So here is this timeline. It's sort of in the midst of history. And you can picture a little bit of what's going on all around this situation. Now, throughout Isaiah's ministry, what did he do? Was he always liked by people? No, because prophets oftentimes aren't received where they're at because they give messages that are hard to hear, and nobody wants to hear that they've been making a mistake, right?
That's correct. Boy, you don't. No, you don't.
You can say what you're going to say.
You would expect a prophet to not be lying. Let me put it that way.
Well,
Jeremiah had his confrontation with those lying prophets of Jerusalem.
Yeah.
And they threw him in a cistern because he was the true prophet.
Well, and when you look at the prophets of old, their journey wasn't very easy. They were rejected. Oftentimes had to go through some things that we would.
Well, they were murdered too.
Even during their lives where it seemed abusive. But during Isaiah's ministry, he told people, man, you're sinning. You are sinning. You are not living like you're supposed to be living. But he also declared the hope of Messiah. He said he's going to come. He's going to come to provide a way. So he had a twofold message. Repent, you're sinning, and Messiah's on the way, right? And that's a good message. So
he also talked about the greater Exodus.
That's true.
The reuniting of all the tribes that have been sent out and dispersed among the nations. So he gave a prophecy of hope, saying it will be restored one day, and that's what we're waiting for.
Right. But the destruction had to come first. So when we read Isaiah 6:1, in the year King Uzziah died, I saw Jehovah high and exalted, seated on the throne, and the train of his robe filled the temple. This verse is describing what Isaiah actually saw, that vision that he had. The throne and the one seated on it, what did it look like? It had to be even beyond words, incomparable, majestic. It had to be so unworldly, I would say. Not anything that he had seen of this world, because he was high and lifted up. A king's throne, oftentimes, the higher it is, the more power or the more prestige or all of the above that he has. Well, Yahweh's throne is high and lifted up above every other throne, above man's ideas of what thrones are. So then if we know that we're not really going to focus on the throne tonight, though we will, we're going to look at this train. Why is this train significant? I know if you just have your mind's eye and you're picturing the train filled the room, you see all these layers of fabric filling the room, you say, wow, he's got a big train because he's Yah. Well, is that the reason?
The more important the king, the bigger the train?
Is that the reason? We'll find out. So what king was Uzziah? Uzziah is actually the 10th king of Judah, of Yehudah. And as was read earlier, he rose to his position at the age of 16, and he reigned for that 52 years. But he wasn't out in front of his people the whole time because, remember, we talked about he messed up. So he had to co-reign with his son Jotham. And the nation of Israel Judah saw great prosperity during his reign, great prosperity during his time with Judah. And there was this, but at the same time, there was this growing threat because there was this major superpower rising up, and that was Assyria. And we all know that Assyria would eventually take the northern kingdom. But the threat wasn't just for the northern kingdom at the time. You know, there's this superpower, and you look at a nation that all the nations probably were wondering, what's the superpower going to do? So what kind of king was he? He was energetic. He was a builder. He was a planner. He was a general. He built really strong defenses in Jerusalem. He also conquered. He was a military guy. He conquered the Philistines. He conquered the Arabians. He conquered the Ammonites. And each of those people groups, they actually had to pay tribute to him. So some of the wealth came in from those other nations. So let's look at 2 Chronicles 26:8.
All right. So 2 Chronicles 26:8
Yes.
reads, the Ammonites also gave tribute to Uzziah, and his fame extended to the border of Egypt, for he became very strong.
Okay. So his reign was very successful. Whatever he was doing as king was working. His kingdom was growing. The people from other nations respected him, feared him even. And so his reign, everyone took notice of his reign because he was known throughout the Middle East. Even, it said, even unto Egypt. So let's look at the verse 5 of 2 Chronicles 26.
And he continued to seek God in the days of Zechariah, who had understanding through the vision of God. And as long as he sought the Lord, he sought Yahweh, God prospered him. Yah prospered him.
You know, I hear about that kind of thing even now. Now, does that people are better off when they're serving Yah? Go figure, right? Because when our eyes and our gaze and our ways are committed to him, when we're following his commands, when we're loving him, I'm not saying it's going to be perfect, the perfect journey. There's going to be trials and tribulation, but all will go well because we know we're still on the path of righteousness. So as long as he stayed on that path, as long as he put God as number one, his kingdom expanded, his kingdom prospered. But what happens to many when things are going so great? The wealth is coming in. He's got power. He's got authority. Sometimes it goes to your head. And we see that. We see that throughout history. Get a little bit of prestige, get a little bit of power, get a little bit of authority, a little bit of fame. And all of a sudden you forget where you came from.
Or just a little bit of success.
Success.
You know, it's like, oh, I've got the blessings on God on me. I must be elevated above all those that are around me. I must be special.
Mm-hmm. You think you're special. You think you're above the law. You think you're above everybody. All this pride grows within you and you forget to give glory to God. Because it's not by your might. It's not by my might, nor by my power, but through his. And it's the same with King Uzziah. King Uzziah did not reach the heights he did because of his own talent, because of his own ways, because of his own decisions. He reached that place in life because Yah placed him there, because Yah made a way, because Yah gave him favor, because Yah went before him.
Well, and it's also because he sought Yahweh in all that he did.
Yeah.
And that relationship was strong.
Mm-hmm.
And yet something came in and started to say, wow, you're really special. God really loves you. God really likes you. You must be as great as King David.
Mm-hmm. Pride. That's all I can say. And we can't isolate it to him because it happens all around us. All of a sudden, we're taking credit for something that Yah did. Oh, I preached a great message. Oh, I did this. Oh, I accomplished this. I made this much money. I had a great idea. Really? You? We are in that same position when we begin to take credit for what Yah's done. In our life, nothing is due to us. Because he's the one that gives us wisdom. He's the one that gives us favor. He's the one that gives us great ideas. He's the one that opens those doors that other men can't open. That's him. And we cannot take his glory. And that's what was happening here with Uzziah. Uzziah started getting really puffed up. He started getting a big head. And he thought, you know what? I'm a great king. I could be a great priest too. So what does he do? He goes inside the temple. Not only inside the temple, he goes inside the temple where the priests themselves were not even allowed, right? And what does he do? He wanted to perform the sacrificial duty of the high priest and offer incense. You can't do that. Yah has protocol. He has a protocol of the way you approach him. He has protocol. and the veil had not been rent. There are things that had not happened yet, and you sure did not get out of order. He was the king. He wasn't a high priest. He thought of himself so highly that he thought he had authority to do anything, and that includes go against Yah's word. Because you don't make a mistake and say, well, he didn't know. Oh yes, he did. Remember, kings, what did they have to do? Carry the Torah scroll, write it out, carry the Torah. Yes.
Write out that whole book of Devarim, of Deuteronomy, by hand,
and carry it with them. So we see a lot of this recorded in 2 Chronicles chapter 26. We're not going to read it right now, but because of what he did here in this place, because of pride, because he had lost his way, he was struck with leprosy. And how did he have to live? John read it. He had to live in separation, just like a leper, just like any other leper. And he had to share the rule of his kingdom with his 20-year-old kid, Jotham, his 20-year-old son. And that makes me think of also, because of that humbling, it makes me think of King Nebuchadnezzar, that he also was humbled, going and eating grass living as an animal for 7 years, eating grass and doing that. When we puff ourselves up, when we let pride take over, maybe not as a king, because there's not many of those, but we still have this problem with pride, there may be a humbling coming our way.
And he did a lot. I mean, think about this. He did a lot to continue the principles of his father in serving Yah. Oh, the only thing that he didn't do is take down the high places, but that
should have been taken care of
which
too, though.
which should have been done. But on the other hand, the fact that he did love God and he was serving God and he did seek the Lord in all that he did, and I think it should give us all pause to think, oh, well, that was then, this is now. No, as we talked about the last couple times here on Walking in Spirit and Truth, that Yah never changes. And so like what happened here, a king was not to be priest. They were two different roles. The priests were ordained to serve Yahweh in his presence, in his temple, on behalf of the people. And the king was supposed to be of and among the people who was served by the priests. And yet the priests would serve the king, but because the king had the kingly role to rule in the nation. So what a mess. And it makes me think he was covered with leprosy. And what is the sin of leprosy? It's the mouth. It's the mouth. It's the Lashon Hara. What was he engaging in? I mean, that he would actually say something that would undermine the priest by chance? The Lashon Hara, the evil speaking of the tongue, and he's stricken with leprosy.
But how many times before you go, ooh, how many times have you spoken out against the congregation or the leaders of the congregation that you're in, or another congregation?
And one other thing too is, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. It's our very actions come out of where our heart is, and being so filled with himself, filled with that pride, filled with, hey, I am such good favor with God, I should be able to burn incense too. And that arrogance coming out of his mouth put him in jeopardy. He could have been struck dead, but he took on the same plague, so to speak, as Miriam. And we know what Miriam did. She spoke against Moses and Aaron.
She spoke, but she spoke against the leader.
Yeah. So here we have, there has to be a principle, though maybe not mentioned, but for that type of infirmity to strike his body like it did.
Well, all I know is that Yah gives the people a lot more grace today, because I cannot tell you how often the leaders of congregations are spoken against. Even us. Even us. That doesn't even sound like a right statement. Including us. I think it's a favorite pastime of people to criticize the leadership when you're doing your best. You know, well, John and Sandy this, or they over there that, or and I could do better this and that and the other. Well, God didn't appoint you in that place, and to be in that position is a huge sacrifice in your life. It costs everything that you have, but people love to speak evil against the leaders.
There's well, and I was talking a little bit about that on Shabbat, but there is a lot of just the role itself, the requirements and everything. There's a lot of heartache in it. And then to add to the heartache, to have the evil speaking going on, and honestly, many times unable to say anything, or not wise to say anything.
You can't defend yourself.
You can't defend yourself, or against our family. And so that just,
but we're not unique, guys. We're not unique.
Everywhere.
It's everywhere.
It's everywhere. And we have to learn to be that, because in Jeremiah, Ezekiel chapter 20 is where we will all pass under the rod. We're all the same sheep, and there will be a dividing of the sheep, and those that will enter in and those that will not. And I tell you what, I think we, at some point in time, we're going to come and understand that the serious side of Yah, just like Uzziah did, that when he came and he learned that.
I agree. And I think it's better that we learn to guard our tongue. And if you can't say anything nice, don't say anything at all. And if you have a problem with the people, then you go say, how can I help you?
Or here's the other thing that, it goes a long ways, and we all grow from it. But it's when once one will say, they've got all their thoughts in their minds. And a lot of times we just magnify things in our mind above and beyond what the reality is. That's just the nature of man. And you know what going to that person and sitting down and talking to them and say, this is going on. What's this about? I don't understand, or clarify, or
I heard you say
heard this. And oh yeah, I mean, how many times, Sandy, have we, even recently, we've heard people say, well, Pastor John said this, and it's really messed with me, and I was like, no.
Well, here's the thing, is that here's where we take fault, is that when we hear something and it's hurtful or it just doesn't sit right, we go to our brother. And that's why God actually instructs us to do this, because oftentimes what was said is not what was heard, and vice versa. So we need to clarify, is this what you meant when you said this? This is what I understood. Is that what you meant? But instead, we'd like to talk. And I don't want to stay there much longer, but we cannot find Uzziah's action. Ooh, I can't believe he did that, because we have a whole millions of people that do it every day, believers, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think one of the things is also to point out about King Uzziah is that Yah did not remove him from the throne.
No, he didn't. But, okay, not completely, because he removed him actually from sitting on that throne. So in a way he did, but he did have a stand-in. He didn't completely remove him and kill him and knock him out. But he did remove him because he could no longer sit on that throne.
That's true. And yet he still remained king.
But he was still king. But imagine that. He was ruling with his son Jotham, Jotham, if you want to say that J, for a while. In fact, his son ruled another 5 years, which equaled a total of 16 years, until he was later forcibly removed from the throne by Ahaz, who took the throne at the time when the northern kingdom was facing conquest. So what we have here is the northern kingdom's getting ready to be assimilated, taken in with Assyria, and there was a change of power in Judah. So Israel asked King Ahaz to form an alliance. They were like, hey man, Assyria's breathing down our throats. They could come get us and conquer us just like other nations. And guess what? You'll be next. So let's just form an alliance. Let's form this alliance, is what Israel said to Judah. Now, remember, there's two kingdoms, and then we'll be good. And that is not what Isaiah wanted them to do. And that's not what God wanted them to do. And it's not what he wants us to do. He wants us to say, oh, there's a threat of an enemy. My God's got this. Oh, there's a threat of invasion. My Yah's got this. He's going to take care of it. Now, the nation has to be right before God. You and I have to be right before God, but we make a mistake when we try to logically move the pieces around so that we can make ourselves safe or so that we can feel secure, when our security and our trust should be in our King. It should be in Yahweh himself. And this is what Israel was doing. And Uzziah even and the nation were looking for the alliance of nations to join up. Maybe there's power, but Isaiah convinced him, do not seek an alliance at all. Don't do it. Don't do it. And actually that was good, because the northern kingdom was taken. It did fall to the Assyrians. So that brings us back to what it was said earlier. He did what was right in the sight of Yehovah, of God, according to all that his father Amaziah had done. So let's go back to our phrase in verse 1. The train of his robe filled the temple. Does God have a big train that he's running around in? We're not going there. That's not what this is really about, because there's always such symbolism, and there's so many pictures and things that we need to learn. And we may not understand unless we go back into the culture of the time, into the Hebrew, et cetera, et cetera. So let's go to Isaiah. If he had this vision of Yah sitting on the throne in the temple, and his train was filling the temple up right after King Uzziah died in 742 BC, if you realize what was going on, then the vision may make more sense, because 20 years later, what happens? Just what we just spoke of. 20 years later, King Shalmaneser V of Assyria, what did he do? Just what we talked about. He took in the northern kingdom. He conquered them in 722 BC. So that fall of the northern kingdom would be the first time the Hebrew people were suffering under a foreign ruler since Egypt, since slavery. And this is what we're studying right now. They escaped. And you would say, why would we fall back? Just 900 years and we go back and we fall into slavery and the old patterns? Well, I'm going to ask you this. We're not going to expound upon this. Let's just think of the United States. We were founded as a nation seeking religious freedom. Yes, I know there's other things involved, but many came over who wanted to worship and follow the commands of God, worship the way they wanted, and get away from taxation and get away from the heavy-handed monarchs and kings of the time. And what are we doing right now? We're falling back into that same pattern, although we didn't wait 900 years. If we go the 1600s to now, it's a much shorter time span. So we're not going to expand upon that. That would be a different time. But we're doing the same thing because we have lost sight of the one we're supposed to worship.
Just like from the time of Abram to the time of the Exodus, 400 years. And it's been 400 years since the coming of Jamestown and the Mayflower that we've allowed ourselves to be enslaved once again.
And lost sight of the whole reason that we came. We got freedom and we've been giving it away. They had freedom and they began to serve other gods and they were giving it away. So 900 years later, the northern kingdom is out. The northern kingdom is no longer the northern kingdom. So do you think anybody could believe that would ever happen at the time?
No.
I mean, they were the ones that everyone feared because they were famous for all that happened with the plagues and the Red Sea and everything else God had done to conquer and take care of them. And yet they gave it all away because they lost sight of him. And we do the same thing. So do we trust? Because it's, all these years later, we're following the same thing over and over. Now, we're going to go ahead and focus in, because of time, on the train because it's symbolic of something. In ancient times, a monarch's robe was a symbol of glory. It was a symbol of splendor and triumph and victory. Robe is not the correct word. The train. It is very, very important to understand the importance of the train. So if you remember in the day, clothing couldn't be you couldn't go out to whatever and have the synthetic fabrics or whatever fabrics made and have this whole, all these courtiers and things that would, I'm sure there were some, but it wasn't like it is today. You had these natural fabrics and everything had to be done. Everything had to be sewn by hand, cotton, linen, wool, that thread had to be made, woven into the cloth had to be cut, and then you make the garment. It was not a process that took just a short bit of time. It took a long time to do this. And so only the rich and the powerful could afford fancy garments, extra length to their garments, robes, etc. But remember, the longer the train, the more splendid the king. Also, this is something that would happen when you would see a king send his men into battle. After they defeated the enemy, the king would walk through the battleground and take the spoils. Okay, yeah, we've got that. Take the spoils that are there. But one of the greatest recognitions for the king, especially of Egypt at the time and Assyria and other things, was they would take a piece of the defeated king's robe and they would cut it off, and it would be sewn at the bottom or to the end. And so you would see the nations conquered because of the length of the train and because it was a signpost and a witness that they ruled over them, that they defeated them. So this robe and the length of the robe, therefore, was a sign of his greatness, the king's greatness. The more victories he'd won, the more kings he defeated, the longer the robe. Now, I want you to remember that if the king had a long train, it also symbolizes strength and security. We know that if you saw this kind of robe, that king was a conqueror. He had gone on conquest, and that there had been battles and war, and he ruled over it. It was impressive to anyone who visited them. It was impressive to the world around them because that robe was pretty much a show as well. So what does that mean then? Why does Yah's train fill the room? Well, if his robe fills the temple, wouldn't it be a great sign that he ruled over all nations? There wasn't one nation that he doesn't rule over and doesn't right now. Officially, I mean, we've given power to men, but he is the King of Kings. You know, when you sing the train of his robe fill the temple, I don't know how you could ever have a different have the same vision you once had, because there's significance to that. And only when you knew the culture of the time, only when you knew that, would you understand that, oh, his train filled the man, every nation fell under his authority. Yes. Every nation falls under his authority. He, you know, nobody's going to seize his train. Nobody's going to cut parts of his off. No, his train fills the temple because he is king. He is Yah.
And think about this. I mean, the temple is the dwelling place of Yah. And this is what people understood when people went to Jerusalem and they saw the temple. And during the feast times, when they'd have the front doors open, and you could see this first big expansive room, and then you say, wow, that's pretty impressive, and how tall it was and all of that. And then you say his train filled the temple. You think, oh my goodness, like piles and layers and swirls, and it just, there's not enough. I mean, the whole space filled with it. I mean, I'm thinking about, you fill up a glass of water, you fill it. How do you know it's full? Because it's overflowing.
Because it's overflowing.
Yeah.
So would his robes be. And this is what he saw. Am I saying that Yeshua, Yah, walks around with a train like that? No, but he also gives us things that we could understand, and the people could definitely understand that at the time. We don't. We think, wow, that's a really cool robe, and he's walking around with it. So let's look at the Hebrew of that word. The word is shul. Okay, H7757, train, shul, and it's spelled with a sheen, a vav, and a lamed. Oh. And so let's look at it a little bit more, and it means the hem or the garment or the last leaf to sprout. Let's look at Exodus 28:33. Exodus 28:33.
Exodus 28:33, coming right up. Exodus 28:33. Yes, this is real time, folks. Okay. And you shall make on its hem pomegranates of blue and purple and scarlet material all around on its hem,
Sure.
and bells of gold between them all around.
Okay, so that's the first usage of this word. And so let's look at the spelling in the Paleo and in the Hebrew, and let's see if we can come up with something there, because we have the sheen, and the sheen is that picture of the teeth, and it can mean to consume or destroy or to crush or press, but it can also be that consuming fire. You know, teeth are used to make food ready for consumption, but Yah is a consuming fire. Okay. So hold that thought right now. And then let's look at the Vav. The Vav is always a connector. It's this picture of this nail or this tent bag, and it's always connecting or securing two separate objects from one to the other. And it could be a picture of a man bent over, symbolizing the humbleness and things like that too. But also, let's look at the Lamed. That Lamed is that picture of the staff, and it can mean to goad or teach, but it also means to control or to have authority or the voice of authority. It represents something that leads you and, when necessary, prods you or goads you. So we have this consuming fire of God, and then we have something that connects, something that secures to this voice of authority, to Yah's voice. So what does that mean? How would you put it together? So we have the consuming fire. The train is this can be this consuming fire, and that secures us to the voice of authority. Well, I wonder how that is. Well, let's think about it for a minute, because Isaiah saw in his vision Yah dressed as a king with a train attached to his robe that filled the temple. Okay, so somehow this connects us to this voice of authority that it controls, and the king does control. He is the one, and I think that control is expected when we look at this paleo, because in this vision he has conquered. He is conquered, the conqueror of every nation. All right. So what does that mean? Do you have any thoughts?
Well, the only thing one of the things that I first think of when I think of the word shul is how that is also the Hebrew word for school.
Right.
And so what is the purpose of the school but for learning? So it's to draw out, it's talking about being drawn out, this train that's lengthy, it's long, it's drawn out. Mm-hmm. And so the shul, in the same sense, is to draw out the learning. And if you think about the typical Hebraic way of learning, is oftentimes through questions. So if you have a question, that the answer is oftentimes referred to back by the teacher is another question. So in other words, to draw out, because it's pulling the inspiration out of us, so then we become aware of it, and then we can learn by it. And so I'm thinking, in the sense of this train that's filling the temple, we in his presence, what's he do? He draws out of us the stuff that we don't need. He draws out of us the stuff that's hidden away, the buried treasure, the things that causes us to seek out and to learn and to grow and to be inspired by his kingdom, as opposed to any other kingdom of the world. Well, of course, there's the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. So right. In other words, to leave the kingdom of darkness and be drawn into the light.
Right. Well, in the end, we know that every king and every nation that has ever existed will be a part of God's train, showing that he has and will conquer them all. So let's move forward and think about that. He was and will conquer them all, because this picture of Yah's train represents that he's this even greater conquering power over what? Over every evil that's out there, compared to every earthly king conquering one enemy. He's conquered everything, even that evil. And Isaiah prophesied that Messiah would come to provide a way to have sin forgiven, to bring the house together, to be united, etc., etc. And guess what? That's been fulfilled through Yeshua. And it is through him that the way is made so that we can be part of his kingdom and not the conquered kingdoms, I would say. But it requires teshuvah. It requires repenting. It requires us to humble ourselves and to make sure we remain that way. So we've got to focus on the fact that Yah is in control. But that means we need to act like he is in control of everything, because nothing's going to surprise him that we do, or that the kings of the earth do, or that anything else happens. He's outside of time. He's already been there. He's been there. He sees that because he is mighty. He's our creator. He's our healer, our deliverer, our shepherd. He is that shalom. He is the strong tower. He is. We've said it over and over, and we need to get that through our head, because we've lost sight of that as a people, and maybe even in our own homes and families, because there's so much pressure and things that have risen up, and we lose sight that he has conquered it all. But what is our job? Our job is to enforce that victory, because he's the only one that can set us free from these worldly things. He's the only one. We need to cast our anxiety and worry, because he has conquered it all. If we would truly learn from that, it could transform our lives. And we've got to remember, when we start doing it, guess what? We can dust ourselves off and try to get it right the next time. You guys need to listen to my message from last Shabbat. You can look at it on our YouTube channel. I'm not as strong as I thought, but he gives second chances. In fact, what do we say? This is the Torah portion where we would say some trust in chariots and some trust in horses, powerful kings and government and presidents or rulers. But where's our trust? Our trust should be in Yah alone. Let's look at Matthew 6, just as a reminder. So we hear this word go forth, because there is something that happens when we hear the spoken word. When we hear that word, when we read it and hear it, that's even better. So let's turn to Matthew 6. We'll start with verse 25 through 26, and you can go through 28 to 28, I mean.
Okay, so we have Matthew 6, 25, 26. For this reason I say to you, do not be anxious for your life as to what you shall eat or what you shall drink, nor for your body as to what you shall put on. Is not life more than food, and the body than clothing? Look at the birds of the sky, of the air, that they do not sow, neither do they reap, nor gather into barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not worth much more than they?
28.
And then verse 28, and why are you anxious about clothing? Observe how the lilies of the field grow. They do not toil, nor do they spin. Yet I say to you that even Solomon in all his glory did not clothe himself like one of these.
31.
Do not be anxious then, saying, what shall we eat, or what shall we drink, or what shall we clothe ourselves? For all these things the Gentiles eagerly seek. For your heavenly Father knows that you need all these things. But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things shall be added to you.
33. Just the first part.
Oh, that was 33.
34.
Okay, therefore, do not be anxious for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own.
So here we have the conquering king. He is the one that we receive forgiveness from, and we can rest in that security. We can rest in him in all things. And we cannot forget that he is the source, that when we try to conquer or do things on our own, we will fail every time. So we cannot worry about everything. We can't get puffed up on the things we accomplish, but we must remember that Yah's robe, Yeshua's robe, shows us that his train filled the temple, that every kingdom is under him in his authority. That means every battle that you face. That means every threat. Where do you put your trust? It's in him alone. So.
And I think that takes us back right around to Isaiah chapter 6, verse 1. In the day that King Uzziah, or in the year that King Uzziah died, what does it say? I saw Yahweh sitting on the throne, lofty and exalted, with the train of his robe filling the temple. I mean, here was this king. He did great things, and maybe everybody was just shaken by his death. He even survived with leprosy for a long time, and here he's like, whoa, this is the King of Israel. I bet you it was absolutely transforming. So, all right. Well, very good. Well, thank you all for joining us this evening for Walking in Spirit and Truth. So, this is John Craig.
And this is Sandi.
And until next time, shalom.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.